The prison transport ship smelled like fear and metal. Jake Torres sat with his hands bound, watching the stars blur past through the small window. He'd been arrested 3 days ago, dragged from his repair shop by Imperial guards in their gleaming armor. His crime? Making a noble's yacht fly better than it was supposed to. Illegal modifications, they'd called it. Jake called it good work. Now he was heading to the palace for sentencing. Everyone knew what happened to humans who broke Valorian law. The Empire didn't execute people anymore, they said they were civilized. Instead, they sent criminals to the prison moons where the cold and the work killed you just as dead, only slower. Jake was 32 years old. He'd come to the Valorian Empire 5 years ago looking for work. Humans were rare this far from Earth, and most aliens thought they were primitive. But Jake was good with machines. He could fix things that Valorian engineers said were beyond repair. His small shop in the lower districts had been doing well, right up until Lord Vexian decided to report him for making his ship too efficient. The transport landed with a heavy thud. Guards pulled Jake out and marched him through halls made of white crystal that glowed from within. Everything in the palace was beautiful and cold. Jake had never been anywhere like it. His work boots squeaked on the polished floor. They brought him to a massive room with ceilings so high they disappeared into shadow. At the far end, sitting on a throne that seemed carved from a single piece of blue diamond, was Empress Thessera. Jake had seen pictures of her before. Everyone in the Empire had, but pictures didn't capture how she actually looked. She was tall, like all Valorians, with skin that shimmered faintly blue. Her eyes were completely silver without any pupils that Jake could see. She wore robes that moved like water, and a crown that floated above her head without touching it. Around her stood dozens of nobles and advisors, all watching Jake like he was an insect that had crawled onto their dinner table. "Jake Torres," the Empress said. Her voice did something strange. It came out of her mouth, but Jake could also feel it somehow, like it touched his bones. "You stand accused of illegal technological modifications. How do you answer?" Jake's mouth was dry. "I fixed a ship, Your Majesty. That's all. I made it work better. You modified Imperial technology without authorization. You presume to improve upon Valorian engineering." An advisor stepped forward, his face twisted with disgust. "This human dares to think himself superior to our own technicians." "I don't think I'm superior," Jake said, trying to keep his voice steady. "I just see things differently. Humans, we're good at working around problems. We've had to be." The Empress raised one hand and everyone fell silent. She looked at Jake for a long moment. Then she spoke, and her voice carried sadness that surprised him. "You say you see things differently, that you can solve problems others cannot." She paused. "I wonder if this is true." The Empress stood, and everyone in the room bowed. Jake tried to bow too, awkwardly with his bound hands. Thessera walked down the steps from her throne and stopped a few feet from him. Up close, Jake could see that her silver eyes were not empty. They had depth like looking into mercury. "Come with me," she said. "Alone." The advisors murmured in shock, but no one dared argue. The Empress led Jake through a side door, down a corridor lined with windows that looked out on gardens filled with plants that glowed in the dark. 2 guards followed at a distance. They reached a smaller room still bigger than Jake's entire shop. And there, sitting by a window, was a young woman. She was Valorian, tall and slim, with the same shimmering blue skin as the Empress but darker hair that fell in waves down her back. She wore a simple white dress, and she was staring out the window with an expression that Jake recognized immediately. He'd seen that look on his sister's face years ago, after the accident that had left her paralyzed for 6 months. It was the look of someone trapped inside themselves. "This is my daughter," the Empress said quietly. "Princess Kyle." The princess didn't turn around. She didn't acknowledge them at all. 3 years ago, she was our Empire's greatest speaker, Thessera continued. Her voice cracked slightly. She could negotiate peace between warring systems. She could debate philosophy with scholars. She could make the harshest military commander weep with her words. And then, during a peace summit, someone attacked her with a neural disruptor weapon. It burned through her communication centers like acid through flesh. Jake watched the princess. She was tapping her fingers against the windowsill in a strange pattern. "Every doctor in the Empire has tried to heal her," the Empress said. "We have technology that can regrow limbs, repair hearts, cure diseases that would kill your entire species. But we cannot fix what was done to Kale. Her neural pathways are destroyed. She cannot speak. She cannot write. She cannot even use telepathy. Though most Valorians have at least some ability, she is locked inside her own mind and we cannot reach her. The Empress turned to face Jake directly. In that moment, she wasn't an Empress. She was just a mother who'd lost her child to something worse than death. "If you teach her to talk again," Thessera said, and now her voice was rising, raw with desperation, "I'll give you everything, wealth, land, a title, anything you want. I will pardon every crime. I will make you a citizen of the Empire with all rights and privileges. I will give you a palace if you ask for it." Jake stared at her. "Your Majesty, I'm not a doctor. I'm a mechanic. I fix ships and machines, not people." "You said you see things differently," the Empress shot back. "You said humans are good at solving problems. This is a problem. The greatest problem I have ever faced. Every Valorian healer has failed. Perhaps someone who thinks like you, who comes from a species that had to fight and adapt and overcome. Perhaps you can succeed where we have failed." Jake looked at the princess again. She was still tapping that pattern over and over. Her eyes were distant but not empty. There was someone in there, he was sure of it. Someone screaming to be heard? "And if I fail?" he asked. "Then you go to the prison moons as sentenced," the Empress said. "But if you do not try, you go there anyway. What have you got to lose?" Everything, Jake thought. But he also thought about his sister, about how the doctors on Earth had said she'd never walk again, how his family had learned sign language together during those long months, how they'd rigged up a computer system so she could type with her eyes, how they'd refused to accept that she was gone, just because she couldn't move or speak the way she used to, and how eventually, with therapy and time and sheer stubborn human determination, she'd learned to walk again. These aliens had given up. They'd tried to fix what was broken and failed, so they'd stop trying. Humans didn't stop trying. "That wasn't who they were. How long do I have?" Jake asked. 2 months, the Empress said. "If you can make her communicate again, any communication at all, I will keep my promise." Jake took a deep breath. This was insane. He had no idea what he was doing, but he'd been in impossible situations before. Being human meant dealing with impossible situations. "All right," he said. "I'll try, but I need my tools, and I need you to leave me alone with her. Let me work." The Empress studied his face for a long moment. Then she nodded. "Very well, Jake Torres. Prove that human ingenuity is more than just talk. Teach my daughter to speak again." She left the room, her robes whispering against the floor. The guards unbound Jake's hands and took positions outside the door. And Jake was left alone with a silent princess and a promise he had no idea how to keep. He walked slowly toward the window. Princess Kale didn't look at him. She just kept tapping that pattern, her fingers moving with desperate precision against the stone. Jake sat down on the floor near her, careful not to get too close. He didn't speak for a while. He just watched, the way he watched machines when he was trying to figure out what was wrong with them. And after a few minutes, he began to notice something. The pattern the princess was tapping, it wasn't random. It repeated. It had rhythm, structure. She was trying to say something. She'd been trying this whole time and no one had been listening. Jake smiled slightly despite everything. Maybe, just maybe, this was a problem he could actually solve. "Okay, Your Highness," he said softly. "Let's figure out how to get you talking again." The first week was the hardest. Jake's tools arrived from his shop, boxes full of wrenches, circuit boards, diagnostic equipment, and half-finished projects. The palace servants looked at the pile of primitive junk with barely hidden disgust. But Jake didn't care. He set up his workspace in a corner of the princess's room and got to work. Not on machines, though. On watching, Princess Kale sat by her window every day looking out at the palace gardens. She tapped her patterns against the windowsill. Sometimes she moved her hands in sharp, frustrated gestures. Other times she just stared into space, her silver eyes reflecting the light. The palace physicians came to check on her 3 times a day. They'd wave scanning devices over her head, shake their heads sadly, and leave. None of them talked to her. They talked about her, like she wasn't even there. "The neural damage is extensive," one doctor explained to Jake. "The weapon destroyed the bioelectric pathways that Valorians use for complex communication. We tried regenerative therapy, neural grafting, even quantum reconstruction. Nothing works. The damage is simply too severe." "But her brain still works, right?" Jake asked. "She can think?" "Oh yes, her cognitive functions are intact. But thinking and communicating are different things. Without the proper neural pathways, she cannot convert thoughts into speech or writing. It's like having a computer with no output device. The doctors left and Jake sat down near Cale again. He'd been doing this every day, just sitting nearby, not pushing, not demanding anything. His sister's therapist had taught him that years ago. You can't force communication. You have to create space for it. They talk about you like you're broken furniture, Jake said quietly. That must be frustrating. Kyle's hand twitched. Her tapping pattern changed, became faster, more aggressive. Yeah, I thought so. Jake pulled out his notebook, actual paper, which the Valorians found hilariously primitive. So here's what I'm thinking. They keep trying to fix the pathways in your brain, right? But what if we don't need to fix them? What if we just need to find a different path? He started sketching. On Earth, we had lots of people who couldn't communicate the normal way. Some couldn't hear. Some couldn't speak. Some had brain injuries like you. And you know what we did? We didn't give up. We got creative. Kyle turned her head slightly. It was the first time she'd acknowledged him directly. Jake's heart beat faster, but he kept his voice calm. We invented sign language, using hands to make words. We invented writing systems. We invented computers that could read eye movements and turn them into speech. We invented a million different ways to say the same thing. I am here. I am thinking. I am a person. He moved around so he was in her line of sight, careful not to get too close. Your doctors keep trying to make you communicate like a Valorian. But maybe you need to communicate like something else. Maybe you need to communicate like a human. Cale's eyes met his. There was something in that look, recognition maybe, or hope. Jake couldn't be sure. I'm going to teach you sign language, he said. Human sign language modified for Valorian hands. And if that doesn't work, we'll try something else. And if that doesn't work, we'll try something else again. Because humans don't give up on people just because fixing them is hard. Over the next 2 weeks, Jake worked with Cale every day for hours. He started simple, basic gestures for yes and no. Thumbs up, thumbs down. At first, Cale just stared at him. But he kept at it, patient, never frustrated. The breakthrough came on the 15th day. Jake was showing her the sign for water, hand shaped like a W tapped against the chin. He did it 3 times, then gestured to the water glass on the table. Kyle looked at the glass, looked at his hand, looked back at the glass, then slowly, shakily, she lifted her hand and copied the gesture. Jake felt electricity run down his spine. Yes, that's it. Water. He grabbed the glass and handed it to her. Cale took it, and for the first time since he'd met her, she smiled. It was small, barely there, but real. From that moment, everything changed. Cale was hungry to learn. Every day she mastered new signs. Hello. Thank you. More. Please. Her hands moved awkwardly at first. Valorian fingers were longer than human ones, with an extra knuckle. But she adapted, creating her own variations when the human signs didn't work. The Empress came to watch sometimes, standing silently by the door. Jake could feel her hope and fear warring in the air. She wanted to believe, but she'd been disappointed too many times. 1 month into the project, Cale signed a complete sentence. I am still here. Jake had to turn away so she wouldn't see the tears in his eyes. When he turned back, Cale was crying too, silent tears running down her blue-tinted cheeks. She signed again. Thank you. But Jake knew this wasn't enough. Sign language was communication, yes, but it was limited. Cale had been a diplomat, a philosopher, someone who shaped the empire with her words. She needed more than just gestures. She needed her voice back. That night, Jake sat in his workshop area, surrounded by circuit boards and medical texts he'd borrowed from the palace library. The Valorian medical information was incredibly advanced, but also frustratingly narrow. They could do amazing things with organic tissue, but they seemed to have abandoned mechanical solutions centuries ago. Humans hadn't. Humans loved machines. Humans put machines in their bodies all the time. Pacemakers for hearts, artificial limbs, cochlear implants for hearing. If biology failed you, you built something better. Jake started sketching a new design. A neural interface device. Something that could read Cale's brain activity and convert it directly into speech. Not by fixing her damaged pathways, but by creating entirely new ones. Artificial ones. Mechanical ones. The more he worked on it, the more excited he got. This could work. This could actually work. He showed the designs to the Empress the next day. Tessara stared at the schematics like they were written in an alien language. which in a way they were. You want to put a machine in my daughter's head? She said slowly. Not in her head, on it. Just a small device here. He pointed to his temple. It reads her neural activity and translates it into speech. She thinks the words and the device speaks them. Thessera looked troubled. We don't do this. Valorians don't augment themselves with machines. We consider it, she searched for the word, unnatural. More unnatural than leaving her silent forever? Jake asked. The Empress had no answer for that. Jake turned to Kale, who'd been watching the whole conversation. He signed, I can give you your voice back, but it will be a machine voice. People will know you have an implant. They might judge you. Do you want this? Kale didn't hesitate. She signed back. I want to speak. Any way possible. Thessera watched her daughter's hands move. Something shifted in her face. If this is what Kale wants, then we will do it. But if this device harms her, it won't, Jake said with more confidence than he felt. I promise. He spent 3 weeks building the device. It was delicate work, combining Valorian biosensors with human computer technology. The palace physicians watched with morbid fascination, clearly expecting him to fail. Some of them muttered that it was barbaric, crude, shameful. Jake ignored them. He'd heard people call human technology primitive before, usually right before it solved a problem their advanced tech couldn't handle. The day of the surgery came. It wasn't really surgery, just attaching the device to Kale's temple, where it would interface with her remaining neural tissue. Jake's hands shook as he positioned the small silver disc against her skin. The device bonded with her, tiny connections reaching into her brain with a precision that would have made Earth's best surgeons weep with envy. Okay, Jake said softly. The device needs to calibrate. It has to learn your brain's patterns. Think simple thoughts. Yes, no, hello. Let it map your neural activity. Kyle closed her eyes. The device hummed softly, barely audible. Lights flickered across its surface as it worked. 15 minutes passed. 20. Jake watched the readouts on his diagnostic pad, his heart pounding. The device was working, pulling data, learning. But would it be enough? Then suddenly the device beeped once. The lights went steady. Kyle opened her eyes. She looked at Jake, at her mother, at all the doctors who'd said it was impossible. She opened her mouth and sound came out. Not from her throat, but from the device. A synthesized voice, slightly mechanical but clear and strong. Hello? Princess Kale said. Can you hear me? The Empress made a sound that was half laugh, half sob. She rushed forward and grabbed her daughter's hands. Yes, my darling, I can hear you. Kale's mechanical voice continued, wonder in every word. I can speak again. I can actually speak, the room erupted. Doctors stood in shock. Servants who'd been watching from the doorway burst into tears. Even the guards cracked smiles. Jake sat down heavily, suddenly exhausted. He'd done it. He'd actually done it. Kale turned to him, tears streaming down her face. Thank you, she said through the device. Thank you for not giving up on me. Humans don't give up, Jake said, smiling. That's kind of our thing. But even as everyone celebrated, Jake noticed some of the nobles whispering to each other, their expressions troubled. They looked at the device on Kale's temple like it was a disease, like it made her less than what she'd been. Jake's smile faded slightly. He'd solved one problem, but he had a feeling that he'd just created another. The celebration lasted 3 days. The Empress declared a festival across all 40 systems of the Empire. Princess Kale could speak again. The miracle everyone had prayed for had happened, delivered by an unlikely savior, a human mechanic from the lower districts. Jake was given rooms in the palace, fine clothes and enough credits to buy a fleet of ships. Thessera kept her promise. She pardoned his crimes, granted him citizenship, and offered him a position as royal engineer with a salary that made his head spin. You can have anything you want, the Empress told him during a private dinner. Name it and it's yours. Jake looked around the grand dining hall with its floating lights and walls that showed moving pictures of distant stars. Everything was beautiful and expensive and completely alien to him. I just want to make sure Kale is okay, he said. The device needs maintenance. I should stay and monitor it. Of course, Thessera said warmly. You are welcome here as long as you wish. But Jake noticed she didn't meet his eyes when she said it. There was something she wasn't telling him. He found out what it was 2 days later. Jake was in the workshop they'd set up for him. A whole room filled with tools and equipment that made his old shop look like a child's toy box. He was tinkering with an improved version of Kale's device when he heard shouting in the hallway. "It's an abomination. The princess has been defiled with mechanical filth." Jake stepped into the corridor to see a group of Valorian nobles confronting one of the Empress's advisors. The nobles wore elaborate robes marked with symbols Jake didn't recognize. Military decorations, he guessed. "Admiral Torsion, please," the advisor was saying. "Don't please me," the admiral snapped. He was an older Valorian with scars across his face and a bearing that spoke of decades in command. The princess appears in public with that thing attached to her head, speaking with a machine voice like some kind of robot. "It's shameful. It makes the royal family look weak. It makes her able to speak," Jake said, stepping forward, "which is better than being silent." The nobles turned to stare at him. Admiral Torsion's eyes narrowed. "Ah, the human. Tell me, mechanic, did you consider what you were doing to the princess when you attached that device? Did you think about how she would be seen?" "I thought about helping her communicate," Jake said. "That's all. That's all," the admiral repeated mockingly. "You turned the heir to the empire into a cyborg. You made her half machine. In Valorian culture, that is—" He searched for a word strong enough. "It is disgraceful. It suggests imperfection, weakness, inferiority. Your culture also left her sitting in silence for 3 years." Jake shot back. "So maybe your culture isn't as perfect as you think." The admiral's face darkened. For a moment, Jake thought the man might actually hit him, but then a voice cut through the tension. "Admiral Torsion." Princess Kale walked down the hallway, her steps confident. The silver device on her temple caught the light. Her mechanical voice was calm but carried an edge. "Do you have a problem with how I choose to exist?" The admiral bowed, but his face was still tight with disapproval. "Your Highness, I only worry about how others will perceive you. The Empire has enemies. They will see this as weakness. Let them," Kale said. "I am stronger now than I was in silence. And if our enemies cannot see that, then they are fools." She walked past the nobles without another word. Jake followed her, feeling the weight of their stares on his back. In the privacy of her chambers, Kale's confidence cracked. She sat down heavily, her hands shaking. "They whisper about me everywhere I go," she said through the device. "I hear them. The machine princess. The broken heir. They think I cannot lead because I am no longer fully Valorian." Jake pulled up a chair. "I'm sorry. I didn't think about the political side of this. I just wanted to help you." "You did help me," Kale said firmly. "I can speak. I can think aloud again. I can share my ideas. That is worth any amount of whispers." She paused. "But I worry about my mother. The nobles are putting pressure on her. Some suggest she should name a different heir. Someone whole." Jake felt anger burn in his chest. "You are whole. You're just whole in a different way. Try telling them that." Kale touched the device on her temple. "In their eyes, this makes me less. Machines are tools. Servants. To merge with one is to lower yourself." "On Earth, we don't see it that way," Jake said. "We've been putting machines in our bodies for centuries. Artificial hearts, robotic limbs, computer chips that help damaged brains work again. It doesn't make us less human. It makes us more adaptable." "I am not human," Kale pointed out. "No, but maybe you could be the first Valorian to think like one." Over the next weeks, things got worse. Kyle tried to resume her old duties, attending council meetings, meeting with ambassadors, reviewing trade agreements. But everywhere she went, people stared at the device, some with pity, some with disgust, some with outright hostility. A delegation from the Zarathian cluster refused to negotiate with her, saying they would only speak to a real Valorian princess. The military council suggested she step down from her position as honorary fleet admiral. Even some of the palace servants began treating her differently, their eyes sliding away from her face. Jake watched it happen and felt helpless. He'd given Kale her voice back, but he'd also marked her as different, as other, as less. The breaking point came during a formal dinner. Kale was seated at the high table with her mother and various important nobles. Jake was there too. The Empress had insisted he be honored publicly for his work. A young nobleman, emboldened by wine, stood and raised his glass. "A toast," he said loudly, "to Princess Kale, who chose machinery over medicine. May her synthetic voice never malfunction." The room went silent. It was an insult wrapped in false politeness. Kale's hand tightened on her fork, but she said nothing. Jake stood up. Another toast, he said, his voice carrying across the room. To Princess Kale, who had the courage to adapt when adaptation was the only choice. May the rest of you learn to be half as strong. The nobleman's face went red. How dare you? Enough! The Empress's voice silenced everyone. She stood, her eyes flashing. Jake Torres speaks truth. My daughter chose to live and communicate rather than remain silent. That choice took more bravery than any of you have shown in your comfortable lives. But your majesty, another noble began. But nothing, the Sarah said coldly. I tire of this. Yes, my daughter wears a device. Yes, it is mechanical. And yes, it works. That is all that matters. She sat down, signaling the dinner should continue. Conversations resumed, but the atmosphere was poisoned. Jake caught Kale's eye across the table. She gave him a small nod of thanks, but her expression was sad. After the dinner, Jake found Kale on a balcony overlooking the palace gardens. She was alone, staring up at the stars. I've made things worse for you, Jake said. Haven't I? No, Kale said softly. You gave me my voice. You gave me hope. But you also showed me something painful. How much my own people value perfection over personhood. Not all of them, Jake pointed out. Your mother supports you. My mother is under enormous pressure. The noble houses are already discussing potential alternative heirs. If this continues, I may have to abdicate to protect her rule. Kale turned to face him. I don't regret what you did, Jake. I would choose this device 1,000 times over. But I fear it may have cost me my future. Jake was quiet for a moment. Then he said, what if you're not the only one? What do you mean? I've been thinking. You're facing prejudice because you're alone. You're the only Valorian with mechanical augmentation, so people see you as an exception, as an aberration. But what if you weren't alone? Kale frowned. I don't understand. Jake leaned forward, excited now. There have to be other Valorians who've been injured, disabled, told they can't be fixed by normal medicine. What if we helped them too? What if we showed that adaptive technology isn't a weakness, it's a tool? A choice? The nobles would never approve. Forget the nobles. Your mother is the Empress. She can make a decree. We start small, with people who are desperate. We show results. We change minds one person at a time. Jake's mind was racing now. Kale, you said you were a diplomat before. That you could convince people. So convince them. Show them that being different doesn't mean being less. Kyle stared at him. Slowly, a smile spread across her face, her real smile, not just the voice from the device. You want to start a revolution? I want to help people, Jake corrected. If that's revolutionary in Valorian culture, then yeah, I guess so. They'll fight us. They're already fighting you. At least this way, you're fighting back. Kale thought for a long moment. Then she nodded. All right, let's do it. But we'll need my mother's support. And we'll need to be strategic. We can't just announce this and expect people to accept it. We'll find someone who needs help, someone important enough that people can't ignore them. We'll prove this works, Jake paused. Do you know anyone like that? Kale's mechanical voice took on a thoughtful tone. Actually, I might. There's a war hero, Commander Drace. He lost his bioelectric communication abilities in the same battle where he saved an entire colony. The military retired him, said he was unfit for command. He's been in seclusion ever since. Perfect, Jake said. If we can help him, show that he can command again with adaptive technology, it would prove that augmentation doesn't mean inability. Kale finished. Yes, I see it. This could work. They stood together on the balcony. Looking out at the Empire, Commander Drace lived in a small house on the edge of the capital, far from the palace and the military installations where he'd once served. The house was surrounded by a high wall, and when Jake and Kale arrived, they found the gate locked. Commander Drace, Kale called through the intercom. This is Princess Kale. I'd like to speak with you. There was a long silence. Then a rough voice came through the speaker. I don't receive visitors. Please leave. I know what happened to you, Kyle said. In the Battle of Cora Station. The same weapon type that damaged me damaged you. Another silence. Then slowly the gate opened. Drace met them at the door. He was a big Valorian, heavily muscled with the bearing of someone who'd spent decades in the military. But his eyes were hollow, and he moved like a man carrying an invisible weight. He stared at the device on Kale's temple. His lips moved, but no sound came out. Instead, he gestured curtly for them to enter. Inside, the house was sparse. Military decorations hung on one wall, medals, commendations, a picture of Drace standing with his fleet. There was nothing recent. No personal items. It felt like a museum to a life that had ended. Drace pulled out a tablet and typed on it. The words appeared on a screen. "Why are you here?" "Because I think we can help you," Jake said. "My name is Jake Torres. I'm a human engineer. I built the device that lets Princess Kale speak. I can build one for you too." Drace typed again. "I've seen doctors. Nothing works. Neural damage too severe." "Your doctors tried to fix your organic systems," Jake explained. "I don't do that. I work around the damage. I build bridges where the old paths are broken. Why would I want this?" Drace typed. "So I can be a half-machine joke like the military says I am?" Kale's synthetic voice cut in, sharp. "I am not a joke, Commander. And neither would you be. You saved 3,000 colonists at Cora Station. You lost your voice doing it. Don't you want it back?" Drace looked at her for a long time. His fingers moved over the tablet. "They won't let me command again. I'm unfit. That's what the medical board said. Even if I could speak, they wouldn't reinstate me." "They might," Kale said, "if we can prove that augmented soldiers are as capable as unaugmented ones. Maybe more so. You want to use me as a test case?" "It wasn't a question. I want to give you a choice," Jake said. "Right now you're sitting in this house cut off from everything you loved. That's not living. Let me give you your voice back and then you can decide what to do with it." Drace set down the tablet. He walked to the window and looked out at nothing. Finally, he turned back and nodded once. The work took 2 weeks. Drace's neural damage was different from Kale's. His had affected different pathways, and he'd also lost some motor control. Jake had to design a more complex device, one that would handle both communication and help regulate the signals to Drace's muscles. The military medical board found out what they were doing and sent an official letter of protest. Admiral Torsion himself came to the palace to argue against it. "You're turning our heroes into machines," he told the Empress. "This dishonors everything they fought for." "They fought to protect the Empire," Thesara replied coolly. "They didn't fight to be abandoned when they were injured doing it. This technology is dangerous, unproven. What if it fails? What if it causes more harm? Then we will deal with that," the Empress said. "But doing nothing while good people suffer, that is the greater harm." The Admiral left, but his opposition was clear. He began speaking against the augmentation program. Jake refused to call it a program, but that's what people were calling it, in military circles. Other nobles joined him. They called it the mechanization of Valorians. They said it would weaken the Empire, make them dependent on crude technology. Jake tried to ignore the politics and focus on his work. He spent long hours in the workshop building and testing. Kale helped when she could, learning the basics of the technology. She had a good mind for it, Jake discovered. She asked smart questions and caught problems he missed. "You could be an engineer yourself," he told her one evening. "Maybe in another life," Kale said. Her synthetic voice carried amusement. "In this one, I need to be a princess who changes minds." On the day of Drace's surgery, if you could call the quick attachment procedure a surgery, half the military high command showed up to watch. They sat in an observation room looking down at the medical bay with expressions ranging from curious to hostile. Jake tried not to think about them as he positioned the device on Drace's temple. This one was slightly larger than Kyle's, with additional components to help with motor control. It gleamed silver against Drace's dark blue skin. "Ready?" Jake asked. Drace nodded. His hands were shaking slightly. Jake activated the device. The calibration process began. This one took longer, 30 minutes instead of 15. Jake watched the readouts, making tiny adjustments. Sweat ran down his back. If this failed, it wouldn't just be a personal failure. It would vindicate everyone who said human technology had no place in Valorian bodies. Finally, the device beeped. Calibration complete. Drace opened his eyes. He looked at Jake, at Kale. At all the observers watching from above, he opened his mouth. "Test," he said. The synthetic voice was deeper than Kale's, with a gravelly quality that somehow fit. "Testing, 1, 2, 3, the observers murmured. Drace stood up carefully. The device was also helping regulate his motor control, and Jake could see him processing the new signals. After a moment, Drace took a step. Then another. His movements were steadier, more confident. "How do you feel?" Jake asked. "Strange," Drace said. His synthetic voice carried wonder, but in good, strong, like I'm myself again. Admiral Torsion came down to the medical bay, his face unreadable. He stopped in front of Drace and studied the device. "Commander," he said formally, "you're speaking again." "Yes, sir," Drace replied. "But you're speaking through a machine. Does it matter, sir?" "As long as I can speak?" The Admiral was quiet for a moment. "That depends, Commander. Can you do your job?" It was a challenge. Drace straightened to attention. "Give me a chance to prove it, sir." What happened next surprised everyone. Admiral Torsion actually smiled. It was a small smile, grudging, but real. "Very well," he said. "There's a fleet exercise scheduled for next week. Supply chain coordination for 20 vessels. The officer assigned has the flu. Take his place. Show me you can still command." Drace's eyes widened. Yes, sir." "Thank you, sir." The Admiral nodded once and left. The other observers filed out, whispering to each other. Jake let out a breath he didn't know he'd been holding. "Did that just happen?" he asked Cale. "I think the Admiral is more practical than we gave him credit for," Cale said. "He's a military man. He cares about results." The week before the fleet exercise was tense. Drace spent hours preparing, studying new protocols and procedures. Jake monitored his device constantly, making small adjustments. Cale used her diplomatic skills to talk to other military commanders, explaining the technology, answering questions. Some officers were intrigued. Others were openly hostile. But most were simply curious. They'd all known Drace, they'd respected him. If he could prove he was still capable, it might change some minds. The day of the exercise came. Jake and Cale watched from a command center as Drace coordinated the supply chain. 20 ships, hundreds of personnel, complex logistics that had to be managed in real time. Drace's synthetic voice came through clearly, giving orders, making decisions, solving problems. He was sharp, efficient, and confident. The exercise ran smoothly. When it was over, the other commanders gave him nods of approval. Admiral Torsion made his announcement that evening. "Commander Drace has been reinstated to active duty, effective immediately. He will be assigned to Fleet Logistics Command." The news spread through the Empire like fire. A retired hero, brought back to service through human technology. It was unprecedented, it was controversial, and it opened the floodgates. Within days, Jake started receiving messages. Injured soldiers wanting to serve again. Diplomats who'd lost their ability to communicate. Engineers who'd lost fine motor control in accidents. Even some civilians. Artists who couldn't create anymore. Teachers who couldn't speak to their students. All of them asking the same thing. "Can you help me?" Jake set up a proper medical facility in a wing of the palace. The Empress provided funding and staff. Cale helped organize, reaching out to each person, hearing their stories. They were careful, selective. They took cases where they knew they could help, where the technology was appropriate. 3 more successful cases, then 5, then 10. Each person who walked out of Jake's clinic with a working device became a living argument against the nobles, who called augmentation shameful. These weren't broken people. They were people who'd found new ways to be whole, but not everyone was happy. As the augmentation movement grew, so did the opposition. Admiral Torsion might have been won over, but other military leaders saw it as a threat. Conservative nobles called it an insult to Valorian purity. Religious leaders claimed it violated the natural order. One evening, Jake found a threatening message on his door. "Stop mutilating our people, or we'll stop you permanently." He showed it to Cale. She read it, her expression hardening. "We need to go public," she said. "Really public. We've been working quietly, helping individuals, but people only see." The Imperial Senate chamber was enormous, with seats rising in circles around a central platform. 500 senators from across the Empire filled those seats, all wearing their house colors and symbols. The air hummed with bioelectric energy as they whispered to each other, their natural Valorian communication mixing with spoken words. Jake stood in an observation gallery, watching as Princess Cale walked to the platform. The silver device on her temple seemed to glow under the chamber's lights. Every eye was on her. Empress Thesara sat in the high seat reserved for the ruler, her face carefully neutral. She'd approved this speech, but Jake knew she was worried. One wrong word, one failed argument, and the entire augmentation program could be shut down by Senate vote. Kale stood at the center of the platform. She waited for the whispers to die down. When she spoke, her synthetic voice carried clearly to every corner of the chamber. "Senators of the Valorian Empire," she began. "3 years ago I was your princess and diplomat. I negotiated trade agreements. I prevented wars. I represented our empire to the galaxy. Then in one moment, a weapon took all of that away from me." She touched the device on her temple. "I spent 3 years in silence. 3 years unable to speak. Unable to share my thoughts. Unable to contribute to the empire I love. Your best doctors told me there was no hope. The damage was too severe. I should accept my fate and live quietly." A few senators nodded. They remembered. Everyone remembered the princess's tragedy. But then a human mechanic named Jake Torres looked at my problem differently. Kale continued. "He didn't try to fix what was broken. He built something new. He gave me this device, and with it he gave me my voice back. A machine voice," someone shouted from the seats. "Not your real voice." Kale turned to face the heckler calmly. "You're right. This is not the voice I was born with, but it is my voice nonetheless. These are my words, my thoughts, my ideas. The method of delivery doesn't change their value." She walked slowly around the platform, making eye contact with different senators. "Some of you call this augmentation shameful. You say it makes me less Valorian, that it shows weakness. I want to tell you about weakness." Her synthetic voice grew stronger. "Weakness is giving up on people because helping them is difficult. Weakness is abandoning heroes like Commander Drace because their injuries don't have convenient solutions. Weakness is valuing appearance over ability, purity over results. This human technology is primitive," another senator called out. "We are Valorians. We have the most advanced medical science in the galaxy. Then why did it fail?" Kale shot back. "Why did all your advanced science leave me in silence? Why did it leave Commander Drace in retirement? Why has it left thousands of injured Valorians without options?" She paused. "I'll tell you why. Because your advanced science only works when the problem fits into a narrow box, when it can be solved organically, biologically, the proper way." She gestured to the observation gallery where Jake stood. Several senators turned to look at him, their expressions ranging from curious to hostile. "Humans aren't like us," Kyle said. "They don't have our bioelectric abilities. They don't have our regenerative capabilities. For most of their history, they were fragile, short-lived, and physically weak. They should have died out. But they didn't. Do you know why?" No one answered. "Because they adapted," Kale said. "When their bodies failed, they built tools. When their tools weren't enough, they built better tools. When they couldn't fix something, they worked around it. They put machines in their bodies not because they wanted to be machines, but because they refused to accept limitations." She touched her device again. "This is human philosophy. This is human strength. And maybe, just maybe, it's something we Valorians need to learn." The chamber erupted in argument. Some senators shouted agreement. Others roared in anger. Empress Thesara raised her hand, and slowly the noise died down. "Princess Kale," said an elderly senator named Vorshin, a known conservative. "You speak well. You always have. But you ask us to accept fundamental changes to our culture, to embrace mechanization. Where does it end? Do we all become cyborgs? Do we abandon our organic nature entirely?" "No," Kale said firmly. "I'm not asking you to abandon anything. I'm asking you to add an option. Not everyone will need augmentation. Not everyone will want it. But for those who do, for those who have no other choice, why should we deny them?" She gestured to the gallery again. "Commander Drace, please join me." Drace stood from his seat near Jake and walked down to the platform. His movements were steady, confident. The device on his temple matched Kale's. He stood at attention, a military officer in full uniform. "Commander Drace saved 3,000 lives at Chorus Station," Cal said. "He lost his ability to communicate doing it. Your medical board declared him unfit for service, but with human augmentation technology, he's back on active duty. He coordinated a fleet exercise last week. 20 ships, perfect logistics, 0 errors. Tell me, senators, is this man unfit?" Senator Vorshin frowned. "Commander Drace's service is admirable, but he's one case. One success doesn't prove—" "Then let me introduce you to more," Kyle interrupted. The gallery doors opened and a line of people walked in. Jake had helped coordinate this, working with Kale to bring together everyone they'd successfully augmented. There were 12 of them now. Soldiers, diplomats, engineers, artists. Each wore a device visible and unapologetic. A young woman stepped forward. "I'm Sarah," she said through her device. "I was a musician. A neural virus destroyed my ability to play instruments. The conservatory said my career was over. Jake Torres built me a device that translates my thoughts into musical signals. I'm performing again. I'm teaching again. I'm alive again." An older man spoke next. "I'm Thane. Combat injury left me unable to walk properly. Jake's technology helps regulate my motor functions. I run now, I climb. I do things doctors said were impossible." One by one, they told their stories. Each person was a life reclaimed, a future restored. The senators listened, and Jake could see some of them wavering. Finally, it was Jake's turn. Kale gestured for him to come down. He walked to the platform on shaking legs, very aware that he was one human in a room full of powerful aliens. "I'm not going to pretend I understand Valorian culture," Jake said, his voice sounding small after all the augmented speakers. "I'm just a mechanic. But I understand people, and I understand that suffering doesn't care about culture or philosophy. When someone is hurting, when they're trapped and desperate, you help them. Any way you can." He looked around the chamber. "You call my technology primitive. Maybe it is. Human science is young compared to yours. But we've learned something important. There's no shame in needing help. There's no shame in adapting. There's only shame in suffering when you don't have to." He pointed to the group of augmented Valorians. "These people aren't broken. They aren't defiled or less than. They're whole, just whole in a different way than you expected. And if that bothers you more than their previous suffering did, then maybe you need to think about what you really value." The chamber was silent. Jake walked back to stand with the augmented group, his heart pounding. Empress Thesara stood. "The Senate will vote," she announced. "Do we officially recognize adaptive augmentation technology as legitimate medical treatment? Do we allow its continued use and expansion?" The voting took an hour. Senators argued, debated, conferred with their advisors. Jake watched the numbers tick by on the display screen. Yes votes, no votes. The count was close. Finally, the result appeared. 267 yes, 233 no. The augmentation program would continue. Kale's shoulders sagged with relief. The augmented Valorians in the gallery hugged each other, their devices all speaking at once in joy and celebration. Even some of the senators who'd voted yes smiled. But Jake knew this wasn't over. 233 senators had voted against them. The opposition was still strong. This was just the beginning of a long fight. Senator Vorshin approached Kale as the chamber emptied. He looked at her device for a long moment. "I voted no," he said quietly. "I want you to know that. I still believe in traditional values." "I know," Kale said. "But," Vorshin continued, "I also believe in service to the Empire. And you're right. We cannot waste good people simply because their injuries offend our sensibilities." He nodded to Drace. "Commander, it's good to see you in uniform again." Drace saluted. "Thank you, Senator." Vorshin walked away, leaving Kale and Jake alone on the platform. "We won," Kale said, wonder in her synthetic voice. "We actually won. This round," Jake said. "There will be more fights, I know." Kyle smiled. "But now we have a foundation. Now we can build something real." 3 months later, Jake stood in front of a new building on the outskirts of the capital. The sign read, "Institute for Adaptive Technology, Human Valorian Medical Cooperation." It was bigger than he'd imagined. The Empress had provided funding. Several universities had sent researchers. Even some military officials, impressed by Drace's return to service, had offered resources. Inside, Jake had set up workshops, medical bays, research labs. There were Valorian doctors learning human augmentation techniques, human engineers learning Valorian biology. It was messy, chaotic, and absolutely necessary. Kale joined him at the entrance. She'd been appointed director of the institute, the first official position she'd held since her injury. She wore,